So Harry Reid goes on MSNBC to talk to Chuck Todd. And Chuck Todd's going to ask him a couple of questions. One is about, this gridlock that we see in Washington, D.C., and who's at fault. And Harry Reid says something that I've been dying for a Democratic politician to say, I don't know, at least for 10 years, but I think longer. Let's watch.
Dr. Coburn himself has held up hundreds of things, and the Republicans over here won't buck him.
You don't believe Democrats play any role in this? It feels like a tit-for-tat game. Filling the amendment tree here and all this stuff, and I don't mean to use this process words, but there is no, you don't believe that there's any tit-for-tat going on here? One of the problems that press has in modern-day journalism is everything you do is a tit-for-tat. You won't call things the way they actually exist. What has happened here is the Republicans have stopped everything from happening. So you can give me the tit-for-tat all you want, but the fact is we want to legislate.
Finally, somebody says to the press, hey, wait a minute, this stuff is not even. That's all you ever do. You call it even. You practice neutrality journalism, which on the surface might sound like, oh, shouldn't the press be neutral? No, that is the worst form of journalism. Now, if it was practiced in sports, you'd laugh it out of the building. You know, last night the Lakers and the Heat played, and the Lakers say they won, and the Heat say they won. Who won? I don't know. That's it. That's all I got for you. I'm a neutral journalist. To say that the Heat won would show an anti-Laker bias. It would be laughable, right, in sports. But in politics, where it's much more important, that's exactly the kind of journalism they do. So that's a good example right there, the gridlock issue, right? So is there some tit for tat? Yes, there is. So Harry Reid won't allow some amendments of the Republicans. But he is responding to an overwhelming record number of filibusters, record-breaking obstructionism. And we've shown it on the program over and over. The number of filibusters hasn't just gone up by a little bit, it hasn't doubled, it has gone way more than any record that has ever been seen before. So Chuck Todd does what all the journalists do, unfortunately, in the mainstream press. Well, you did something slightly wrong, and they did something wrong, and I'm going to call it even. Because I don't want to be called liberal, I don't want to say, I don't want people saying I'm biased, so I'm just going to throw up my hands, and I'm not going to tell the American people the truth as to what is actually going on. If you did on the issue of gridlock, you would say that it is clearly, overwhelmingly, the Republicans' fault. Now, is it the Republicans' fault on every issue? Of course not, right? And later I'll be criticizing Harry Reid on a different issue that he talked to Chuck Todd about. But on this one, he's absolutely right. But the press is cowed. They do neutrality. They don't do objectivity. Objectivity is different. You say, I watched the game, and I saw that the Heat actually beat the Lakers, and here's the score. That's not neutral, but it's objective. That's the kind of journalism you're supposed to do. If I was Harry Reid, I would have shown up with a chart of the number of filibusters the Republicans did. But if we had real journalists in the country, he wouldn't have had to show up with that chart because Chuck Todd would have been talking about it from day one. And unfortunately, he hasn't been. So I'll give you one last example of this because it's my favorite example. Iraq War. Whether you thought we should invade Iraq could be considered a matter of opinion. So it's not the job of Chuck Todd or any of the journalists to say, hey, you know what, we shouldn't invade Iraq. Now, I do opinion on this show. I do analysis on this show. So it is my job to say we shouldn't have invaded Iraq. And that's what we said on the show at the time. We were one of the very few shows that said that. Now, why did we say it? On the issues of weapons of mass destruction, it was not clear. Now, a lot of the press presented it as if it were clear. But I'm not asking the press to say there were no weapons of mass destruction because that was a tough issue. I wish they had presented that a lot more thoroughly and showed the real evidence and showed that it was actually, in that rare case, more of a 50-50 issue before the war when on the data that we had, rather than what they seemed to present, which was everybody believes that they have them, right? Okay, but I'm not even blaming him for that. But look, there was a fact in there that they just did not deliver effectively to the American people, and that's exactly what's wrong with the mainstream media. Do you know that when we invaded Iraq, 69% of Americans thought that Saddam Hussein was personally responsible for 9/11? Well, that's just wrong. That's false. That is not true. And it was the job of the American press to say, hey, wait a minute, there's a lot of talk about Iraq here and 9/11. And the Bush administration keeps using it in the same sentence. Let us be clear. Saddam Hussein in Iraq had nothing to do with 9/11. But they didn't say that. Instead, they let the Bush administration make their point over and over and over again, and then they would say, well, there is overwhelming, and they wouldn't say overwhelming evidence, but they say there's evidence that they were not involved in 9/11. On the other hand, Dick Cheney says that Mohammed Atta once went to Iraq, or some nonsense that they had made up. Now, if you were to give the true estimation of that, it would have been 99-1 that they weren't involved. Now we know it's 100-0 that they were not involved, right? But they didn't give that sense. Instead, what wound up happening was 7 out of 10 people in America were misled because the American media will not do its job. They will not bring you the facts. Instead, as Harry Reid points out here, they will do tit for tat. And they'll say, well, Dick Cheney says this, and other people say that, and we're not going to tell you which side is true. We're just going to sit it out, and we're going to literally abdicate our responsibility. So is it time for a Democrat to point out that press is doing that? It's way past time. So credit to Harry Reid for finally taking the fight to them, something he should have done at least 12 years ago.